What is going on, my fellow Summit Chasers, and welcome to another episode of the Summit Chasers podcast, a podcast where we make success simple so that you can live extraordinary. What is going on, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Summit Chasers podcast. And today I am thrilled to welcome I've had one conversation with him, and I love this guy, his energy, his thoughtfulness, and the love for the concept and the theory and the practice of leadership. I am joined today by Matthew Devine. He has 18 years in human resources and change management, and he's worked with hundreds of executives and executive leaders. And he's actually one of our speakers, panelist speakers that we're very excited to have for our Young Professionals Leadership Summit in October in Toronto. That's October 19th in Toronto. Matthew Devine, welcome to the show, my friend. Did I pronounce your last name right? Is it Devine?
You got it right. You got it right.
This is a win for me today. Whatever else happens, it's been a good day. But how you doing, man?
I'm great. I'm great. Thank you for having me on your show. I appreciate it. This is amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I appreciate it. And thank you for jumping on, man. You were on Rob's podcast.
We got together and had a conversation a few weeks back.
Yeah, no, and it was amazing. And the way, just talking to you, obviously, this isn't the first time we've had a conversation. We talked a few weeks beforehand, but your passion around what you talk about, especially when it comes to leadership and coaching, it's almost contagious, I'll say. So that passion is one of the reasons why I'm so excited to have you, not just on the show, but obviously as one of our speakers at the summit. But give everybody a little bit of a background. Where did that passion kind of blossom from?
It started from a place of just wanting to make a difference. Like if I was to go back, the very first kernel of this was a moment when I was a child and realized I could actually help another kid on a playground, which seems like a ridiculous thing. But this place of feeling like I had agency to make a difference. And it may have been something small, like helping this little kid on a jungle gym. But from there, it just gave me this sense of I can do more. And that just led into leadership role after leadership role after leadership role of, and feeling like I could make a change in the world. I could see the impact I could have and what I wanted to have, the impact I wanted to have. And by doing that, I was, people were recognizing that ability, and that just gave me the opportunity to start getting into leadership roles. But then later I realized that relationship, the relationship between the leader, the manager, and the employee, that dynamic is so critical to get right. If you get it right, the rest of the whole mission, everything else starts working, and you also start having an impact beyond the scope of it. So it's this dynamic that allows for a greater impact that has been fascinating me, and especially over the last few weeks. I know we're going to get into that, but just this idea of what impact a manager can have. But it all started back in humble beginnings that just snowballed throughout my life.
So you were always driven to your ability to support, help, and coach others.
It didn't start that way. It started from a place of me feeling like I had agency in the world, that I could make control and difference and change and have an impact. It came later, once I was in a management role and I actually had a real team that I had to develop, I had to guide and direct, and realize that they needed more support. And then that led me into becoming a coach, do the coach training and so forth. And then from there, stepping away from corporate and realizing I can actually do this, be an executive coach and do training as a way of developing people and guiding people and basically supporting leaders to figure out where they needed to go in their careers.
So you always had the seed. You always had the seed. It was always there.
Yeah,
it was always there.
It's always been there. It's been something like if we do the analogy of the seed, it started off small, but it's quite big now.
You got to water it, you got to fertilize it, you got to take care of it, you got to get it in the sun. Do you think that aspect, maybe somebody who doesn't innately have that seed, do you believe, and what would it look like to coach them or teach them into that leadership role? If they don't have that, innately have that seed, like you just explained that you did.
I think the first thing I would do, if there was somebody I was working with who didn't have that automatic sense of I could lead a team, or I could take control of something, is to start exploring a larger vision. So getting them to start imagining what a future version of themselves might look like, what a future version of their work might look like, what a future version of their community, the world that they live in, what might that look like? And getting them to articulate that and starting them to see a difference between where their current state is and what this sort of ideal utopian state could be. And when they can see that difference, then it's an engagement on, well, what steps are then required to go from here to that new place. So it starts with imagining a world outside of what you currently see. Mm-hmm. And when you see that difference, then you can start articulating the steps and start figuring out, well, how do you make that happen? Who do you need to bring with you to make that happen?
Because that's a recipe, and I love what you just said. There's a recipe that, I don't know, I'm going to say it's lost to some people, to some managers, to some leaders, where it's very difficult, and it seems very difficult, especially in today's corporate space, to come in. Maybe you're a manager, mid-level manager, maybe you're a director, something like that. But it's to develop bring those leaders up underneath of you, as opposed to, especially if you're in a big business, hiring from the outside. Okay, let's hire a manager from out here, a director from out here, somebody who's not embedded in the culture, that they haven't been around for any period of time. But it's this. You go from being this high performer or a performer where you are judged based off your personal performance, to then that mind shift of, I'm judged off of other people's performance. But it seems like that innate mindset right there it's tough to shift, because then you go from that high performer, you're judged off your performance, your metrics, your goals, whatever it is, your forecasting, and then you go to this manager position, and instead of judging yourself or being judged, being graded, so to speak, off of your team's performance, you're graded off of your performance yourself to achieve the goal, and your team almost is seen as a tool. So the goal then becomes further away from developing other leaders underneath of you, if that makes sense. That's a very common sort of theme in corporate, right? And in a lot of leaders, not just corporate, but I mean, at the small to medium-sized businesses too. Where should they start? Where do we need to start to help change that culture and change that mindset?
Yeah, well, that transition that you just articulated is a big leap, going from that individual contributor where you're a superstar, you're good at your skills, you're good at what you're doing, into a leadership role where now what you need to be, what your success need to do to be successful is different than what you needed to be successful at your other role. That change in mindset is hard to do, because you're used to being a superstar, and getting into that new role, suddenly you now need to do different things that you're not necessarily good at, which is then isolating, it's demotivating, it's you're doing it wrong as well. So to get past that, as you articulate, there's a few things. First, your boss, the leader who promoted you as a leader of manager, needs to articulate that mindset change to help coach and, in a sense, mentor the new manager in their new role, and say, hey, you're amazing at this new role. Get ready, because you're going to need to work on these new skills, and get your head into a different game, and explain how that works, and articulate what are the challenges they can expect in that role. And the same applies as you move up in the organization. It's one thing to go from just an employee to a manager, but going from a director to VP or into a true leadership role, that's also jarring as well, as you're starting to now have to think about the entire aspect of a company where you don't have even expertise. Like if you grew up in, say, the production side of a business, but you now need to worry about the financial side, the human resources side, these are things that may not be things that you're comfortable with or aware of. How do you get your head into those very different aspects of the business? It's a mindset change, but it starts with the support from the leadership role. But I think it also, from an individual, as you're moving up into the role, understanding the journey changes. The measures of success change as you step up into a different level, and educating yourself as to what those new metrics might be. And you mentioned culture earlier on. That's a dimension that cannot be forgotten, because the culture of the organization can dictate success. So understanding what is the culture, not only of the organization, but at that level? What does that look like? Start asking the questions, start networking sideways to your peer managers to figure out what that culture is, what are the norms, what works, where can you push, and where do you really need to step back and let the mechanisms work.
No, and it's an interesting. This is a very interesting, obviously, nuance to the topic of leadership, because there seems to be a bit of a shift in a lot of, especially, I mean, in a lot of the larger companies too. They're starting to make their shifts. Like you look at Google, Amazon, and these types of things, where the type of management or leadership style was very decentralized. Like you're over here, and then you send each other metrics, most of which are just vanity metrics. They don't tell the whole picture. You just want to make it seem like your department's doing very as well as it can be to look good for everybody else. But then there's this communication lapse when it comes to achieving the main goal of the actual company, where what you just said, and this is why I'm hitting on it, is communicating with your peers. Right? Like you're all, even if you have, 3 or 4 different departments, like you said, there's finance, there's the manufacturing, there's distribution, there's sales, marketing, all this kind of stuff. And if you're all living in your own bubble, in your own little worlds, and you're not communicating effectively, you're much more likely to be rowing in different directions as opposed to towards the same goal. So it's this concept of, as a leader, like when you become a leader of leaders, right? There's this whole other kind of world, as other level that you have to start kind of communicating and living within, which is communicating with other departments. I have to organize strategically so that we're pointing in the right direction. And that is very far removed from me sitting at my desk. I have to make 100 calls today, and I have to book this many appointments. And if I do that, I get a good bonus, and then I can go home. There's such a big gap between somebody starting their career and getting to that, even just getting to that mid-level leader. But then you go into, like you said, that VP level. There's such a huge gap in mindset, skills needed, way of looking at the world, the way of communicating. And there needs to be a much better path provided, much better tools provided, and much more focus on bridging that gap between, I'm just worried about myself and this one particular thing that I'm focused on, to leading people, leading leaders, leading other leaders to execute upon a strategy that I had to help, provide, or I had to help, conjure up myself with a team.
And this gets into, the goals of an organization versus the goals of the individual. An organization is intended to execute on a particular product. They're trying to create a product, they're trying to deliver a service. And so they organize, the org structure gets organized in a very particular way to be extremely efficient to achieve those objectives. But those organizational structures are put ahead of the human structures, the human relationships. And so people can find themselves both isolated in an aspect of the organization where they don't have lateral views, lateral connections, because they're being very efficient in one particular area. But it also enforces a vertical relationship. You're concentrating on who's the person above you or who's the person below you. And that's the relationship that tends to get the focus, not recognizing that the horizontal relationships are also very important in order to develop yourself, to ensure that you have your own support system, but also communication and ability to understand more broadly what's happening in an organization. And I would say the challenge really comes down to, remembering, we're supposed to be connecting with humans here, how do we work on that relationship? How do we build the trust? How do we build the openness, the ability to have that real human connection that is more than just simply sending an email to another person and expecting them to execute a task? How do we make them want to execute that task? How do we make them want to volunteer ideas forward? How do we create that environment? And that's something that's more fluid. It's more mushy than an organizational structure.
If you had to give a new, somebody, they're jumping up into a leadership role, or maybe it's something a director, as they're trying to develop, an individual contributor to a leadership role, and they could only focus on one attribute. They could only focus on one. I'm going to focus on communication with you, or I'm going to focus on, table manners, whatever it is. that wasn't very appropriate for being a leader, but I mean, maybe it helps, right?
Could be. If
It
you're in
helps you gain
hospitality, it may be
respect.
the thing.
Yeah, but what would that, if they had to focus on one thing, whether it's either developing in themselves or developing somebody to come up, what would that one thing that could make the biggest impact on them being successful as a leader be?
You ask a really tough question because I think it really depends. Look, I'll give you an example. So I've worked with a lot of engineers. My background, I've worked in utilities for quite a number of years. So I've worked with a lot of engineers, engineering managers. And if I was to advise an engineer moving forward, I would focus on the emotional intelligent piece, because that's not something that they've been trained to do. It's not something they naturally think about, but it's something that's so required when they move into a leadership role. But if you're in a different organization, the skill may be very different. Fundamentally, if I had to pick and you were forcing me into one, it really comes down to communication. And that's a big word that encompasses a lot of different things. Communication can be subtle. It can be emotional. Communication can even be silence. Like, how do you hold space for somebody? Like, if you're in a meeting with somebody and they're going through an emotional experience, your employee is having an emotional time, they're having difficulty, something's happened. How do you create a space of safety for them where they feel like they can do what they need to do, and you're not going to judge them for it. You're not going to punish them for it because they're going through a difficult time. How do you not say anything in those moments to make sure that they're okay? Or for that matter, when is it right to say something? Like, these are nuanced elements, but they go so far in helping ensure that an employee feels like they're heard, that you trust them, and that relationship starts getting stronger. It's more than just simply mechanically, what are you saying? Communication, what are you telling the other person, and are they hearing you? But how you go about it. Even your body language communicates so much. Are you leaning in? Are you leaning out? Are you shifting around? Are you moving? What does that say? What impact does that have on that relationship, on the people around you? So communication, to answer your question, is the most fundamental piece. How you use your ability to message ideas, capture emotion, receive the messages. As a manager, you're getting impacted by everything coming at you. Your employees are complaining to you, your boss is pointing at you. How do you absorb that in a healthy way, in a way to ensure that you're understanding what you need to do, you're managing the issues, and then pushing out in a positive, effective manner? So there's a lot that falls under communication, but it's about this idea of how do you get ideas in, how do you respond in a way that's going to have the biggest impact? And what impact do you want to create? Are you wanting to create an impact that is going to push somebody over to this side or push somebody over to that side, whatever this side, that side means? The way you show up, the way you communicate, you can, if you're doing this deliberately, you can help make somebody feel like, okay, this is serious. I need to really focus on this detail because the boss is really focused on this. Or maybe you move it in the other direction and be like, oh, this is okay. We don't need to worry about this thing so much. We can take it easy on this point. We may be talking about the same piece, but the way you show up creates the elements of importance or focus that an employee needs to have. And I realize I've just gone off on it, but communication, bottom line, is the most important thing that somebody moving into a leadership role needs to spend like 90% of their time getting better at.
I would absolutely agree, and especially with I want to kind of let this topic kind of marinate a little bit, because communication, to one thing that you said that was so important when you bring up communication as a skill to somebody who hasn't thought about it or hasn't studied it or hasn't even thought that it was something that they need to focus on. When they hear communication, they're like, okay, I'm just speaking on how I speak. How's my tone? Am I articulating myself? Do I understand what I'm saying? Do I sound educated? You think of communication from only one perspective, when there's multiple perspectives that we actually communicate from, and especially from a leadership role. If you want to have a big impact, you have to communicate from all four. So the first, one is just communicating from my own perspective. Like, does this make sense to me? Right? Am I articulating what I want to articulate? Right? You're just speaking from your own word or your own world, your own mind, right? Your own map. right? And everyone has different experiences. So one thing that I could be saying something that makes total sense for me, and I sound really smart, but the next person that I'm trying to speak to, or I'm in a whole room of people I'm trying to articulate a message to, and they're sitting there like, this doesn't make any sense, or this is kind of pissing me off a little bit because I don't understand, or B, this has nothing to do with me, type of thing, right? You're just from your own perspective, and that's where so many people see when they hear you need to work on your communication. That's what they think. They think tone. They think these types of surface level things. And then there's a second perspective where I'm communicating. I'm listening. I'm communicating from your perspective. I'm trying to see things from your shoes. I'm trying to understand your emotions, where you're coming from. I'm trying to understand your experiences. The problem with only focusing on that, though, is that I then can't internalize it and communicate it back to create an effective relationship, to create an effective outcome. Now, the third is typically where you want leaders to, at least to start out to be, which is you want to communicate as the observer. So I'm communicating from your perspective and my perspective so I can control the outcome. Oh, you're in this type of mood? Okay, it seems like my tone or the way that I just explained that, it didn't really work really well, because when I said that, it looked like you kind of slumped down and you look a little bit disappointed. Your tone also changed a little bit. So I'm going to try to meet you at your level and try to understand a little bit more clearly where you're coming from, so we can work together to create the outcome. Now, this is where I want to sit, though, is the fourth one with you, because we talked about, before we even hit record, on the concept of impact and leadership. And communicating from the fourth is communicating from the perspective of the impact your communication has outside of the right in front of you interaction. So if I'm having a meeting or we're at the event, we're communicating from the perspective of the impact of what we're communicating is going to have on the world when they go out. I'm communicating this to this person. That means that they're going to go and provide this information to their team, or they're going to start communicating this way with their team. They're going to apply some of these leadership tactics and strategies with their team. This is the impact that it can have. So being aware of that perspective of impact that your communication could have. So I'm going to let that sit there. I'm going to push it over to you, because I want to let you just kind of go on a roll right now with it seems like you've had this sort of introspective, thought path of the impact that leadership can have, not just on, again, the immediate interaction, but on communities, the world, even future going forward. So I'm going to let you kind of unpacked impact of leadership.
I'm going to start with Gallup. Is an organization that does a lot of studies on organizations. They do a big engagement study, and they work with hundreds and hundreds of organizations around the world. They've interviewed thousands and thousands of employees. And one of the things that they've discovered in all of their research is the relationship between the manager and the employee, and how, outside of family, like family is obviously the most important relationship that an individual has, the relationship with their kids, the relationship with their spouse, that family relationship is number one. But number two is that individual's boss. And if a manager is able to create an environment where the employee feels like, hey, I feel supported, my ideas are heard, I'm able to do good work, the people seem to like me. If the manager is able to create an environment like that, or challenged, whatever it happens to be, whatever the impact, and we'll talk about that in a second. What's the impact of that? They're going to go home. They're going to talk to their family, say, hey, I just had a great day. I did all these things. It was awesome. And that impact is going to be translated onto the family. What is that how are they going to be showing up to their family? How are they going to be showing up in their community? They're going to be coming in with feeling like they can do more. They have more imagination, more ideas, more positivity. They feel rested. All of these things have a positive impact. Now, the flip side is that if that relationship isn't done well, that manager-employee relationship, there isn't the trust, there isn't the respect, that employee is going to go home with the opposite feeling. They're going to go home feeling, oh, my boss is a jerk. I don't like him. We have all this stress. I can't do my job. People hate me. They're going to bring that energy, that kind of emotion back home with them. And that's going to possibly lead to arguments with their families, or, they may be disengaged from their communities because they don't want to bring that kind of negativity to them. It's going to have that negative impact beyond the workplace. And so the manager's impact is beyond just simply what's happening in the workplace. The impact they have is, it is a power that it's going out in beyond the scope of the organization. And I think it's extremely important that managers take that accountability seriously, because there are lives at stake, as it were, based on how well they do this work. And so when it comes to creating impact, part of it comes down to this sense of what's our vision here? Like, what's the vision for that you as a manager want to create here? And maybe this is tying into the vision of the organization. Maybe it's the mission of the company has communicated, well, here's what we want to do. It's the greater purpose of the organization. You can tap into that. But as a manager, you have to also think about, what am I trying to create? What is the vision for my own team? How do I want this team to look? If I could paint the ideal vision of what this team would look like, what is that? Is it a matter of these are all high-performing, creative people engaged and they're all happy, smiling? Great. All right. We have that picture in our mind. How do we create that? Maybe it's a matter of, depending on the environment, depending on the situation we're walking into, that you as a manager are deciding, okay, in this moment, I want to make sure that the people, my team, understands the seriousness of this. And this is before you even start communicating words, before you say anything, before you walk into that room, anything. You need to decide, how am I as the manager going to show up in this? Because that's going to help set the tone of everything else that follows from that. And maybe that is a serious tone. Maybe we are dealing with a serious issue, which point you need to be keeping the energy level, keeping your focus direct, keeping your tone straight and clear. And that starts communicating a certain intensity around, okay, this is important. Mm-hmm. What Matthew is saying right now, this is important. We need to listen to this. And then maybe you have a meeting later on. Maybe you have a different thing that you need to create. But this thing is about, all right, now what I want to make sure is that my team has been busy working, but we need to break. We need to create a rest space for the team so that they can, relax a little bit and, disconnect a bit and just, ease into the connecting with their colleagues, at which point you go in a different direction. Your energy becomes a little bit more dynamic and more smiles, and you relax a bit about how you show up. Again, this is not about the words you say in the particular moment, although you do need to worry about that. But it's coming in with a certain idea. What do I want to create in this moment? I want to create ease. I want to create happiness. I want to make sure that we're connecting. And you understanding what that is that you want to create informs how you physically show up. Then that also informs the word that you can use. And we as leaders can learn, all right, what are the exact words that work well with my team? What are the things can I say that will work or won't work? Mm-hmm. Because, if we're in a corporate office setting, certain things, you can say certain things in a certain way. If we're out in the field with our trades crew, that's a different kind of communication. Mm-hmm. Same principles apply though. Same ideas apply. What are we trying to create with this moment? What's the intention here, the vision? And then building from there. So I'm going to pause there because I feel like I've just hit a bunch of stuff.
You said a lot of stuff, and it was a lot of great stuff. What impact do you think, from a societal perspective, what impact do you think that old school style leadership and management has had on the society, like our culture and our mental health, the way that we view success in general? What impact has old school management style had on those things?
And by old school, I'm interpreting that as like a command and control sort of
commander. They're holding people accountable to forecasts that they don't even know if it should be the right goal or even or possible. They're judged, they're pushed down as opposed to built up, right? They're just there to hit a number. It's like the old school.
Yeah. Yeah. The idea, I think, is between the idea of a mechanistic approach to leadership and thus organizations and thus society versus a creative perspective. That would be if I was to, make a clear distinction, that would be the main distinction. If you're executing on a particular task, and to be clear, there are certain organizations and certain industries that do require very specific
Yeah.
regulated kinds of activities and processes to ensure they're done correctly, because public safety is at stake and you want to make sure that certain steps are done. And so there needs to be a very controlled fashion for certain types of roles. But if it is all a matter of do as I say, command structure, that means that the range of which you can problem solve becomes really narrow.
Yeah.
And as a result, what is possible, how as individuals get trained over the course of their career becomes very much I stay in my lane, this is what I'm good at, and this is what I know, and I'm going to keep doing the thing that I know, because that's what, if I go outside of that, I get stamped down. Mm-hmm. And so it becomes a very linear, very, closed-minded way of approaching things. At which point, what's the impact on society, you ask? You're training people to have a very, focused way of looking at problems, focused way of dealing with issues, which may not be the right way of dealing with it. Because humanity is a mushy thing. We have all sorts of different challenges in our lives. And if we're only approaching them in one linear fashion, we only have a certain range of solutions. Whereas if you're taking approach of, okay, we may have very specific things we need to work on, but as a leader, I want to create a space where I want to hear different ideas, and let's explore ideas, and let's talk about different ideas, and actually entertain different ideas, and finding ways of communicating so that people feel like they have a space to bring up ideas, that you've created communication structures that you allow people more freely to interact and solve problems on their own, or come up with ideas where they can solve an issue. These kinds of collaborative ideas, mindsets, approaches. We may still be dealing with things that are important to have to be done in a particular way, but if we allow ourselves the ability to find new ways of approaching a problem, even if it's a matter of like, all right, we need to get ourselves outside of context, just to get some really fresh ideas, and look at something completely different, that allows, things to spark in ways, connections to be made that might never have been possible before. So to me, I see allowing for space of creativity and allowing for these lateral communications, as opposed to top-down command control, but these lateral matrix style communication to exist, that creates an interesting space where new ideas can form. And as a leader in that kind of space, you need to figure out, okay, how do we keep everyone, like, how do we corral all the cats from like crawling all over each other? Like at some point, you still need to, say like, all right, everyone, we still need to move in this direction. Like, how do you set the tone and direction and say, all right, let's have all this creative space, but we still need to be heading in this direction. Mm-hmm. How do we, that becomes the challenge. Otherwise, directionless, you could go and, you're not being effective that way. You still need to sort of balance between effectiveness and creativity, but if you accept that you don't have all the answers and that you will open the possibility, then you may achieve things that you never thought possible. Mm-hmm. And as a societal benefit, how much does that encourage and the idea of communicating? If you have a problem, maybe it's a matter of just reaching out and talking to somebody and just working it out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's that perspective of we keep that type of leadership has kept everybody's focus like very narrow. It's like to your point, the way they solve problems are now stuck here in this little box, as opposed to their ability to bring in new information and kind of challenge their own biases and challenge, the way things that they've always done, and to be able to kind of think outside of that perspective. But it's also so that there was a case study done on Toyota. Everybody knows, not everybody, but a lot of people know, like Lean Six Sigma, a lot of that was based on Toyota, right? They set the standard for, lean manufacturing and lean process. And they ran into a problem. And it was that they weren't innovating quick enough. They were very good at executing on innovations that already exist, but they're not very good at building out new innovations. They're good at making incremental improvements, right? Because they're always paying attention to the process. They're always paying attention to the outcomes, to the data, the feedback, and that kind of stuff. And then they make very small, what's the word I just said? I don't remember. Intricate, small changes.
Step-by-step.
Incremental. That's the word I was looking
incremental
at. That's what I was looking for. Incremental changes. But they had a problem, is that some of these quick advancements, especially with like EV vehicles and that kind of stuff, right? As that started to become more prominent, they realized that, okay, we're not making big enough innovations. We're not making big enough leaps, because they again, that process, because everybody had one linear focus when they were on the managers, whether it's managers, directors, or people on the line themselves that were working on the machines or working with the machines these days with AI and everything. That they weren't making those big leaps. So they had to find a new way to bring in more innovation, to bring new ideas to the table and allow them to innovate in the same type of fashion that they're executing, right? In a very lean, trial and error, lean experimental kind of way. And so that one of the things that a lot of, thought leaders and, authors and this kind of stuff, people on LinkedIn are kind of taking from it, is that style of leadership these days, because things are moving so fast that innovation is so important, while maintaining the current fulfillment, while maintaining your current product or your current service and innovating and improving that, but also allowing for experiments, allowing for creating space for failure to happen, right? In a positive way. You don't just fail for the sake of failing. You're failing because you pushed the envelope, and you had mechanisms in place that, made it so you don't have to bet the company on it. Like one example is Amazon, when was that phone that they tried to do, was it the Fire? I think it was called a Fire phone. Did you hear about that?
Okay. No, I didn't.
Yeah, so
Hear about that.
Amazon's a great example of this, but they tried to release a phone. I think it was a phone or a tablet or something like that. It's called the Fire, and it failed miserably. And I don't remember if it was Bezos or somebody else high up in the company was doing an interview, and they said, "Are you going to let go of the team that developed the Fire?" And they're like, "No, they're already working on something called the Alexa." Like that was it was expensive. It was a failure, but we learned from it, and we're going to keep experimenting, keep trying. And Amazon's a great example of that, because now, like Amazon Prime, like they started out selling books. Now they have Amazon Prime. They have a whole shipping. Like obviously everyone knows where Amazon is with their shipping. They take over, right? No one leaves their home anymore because of Amazon. They have the shows with Prime. They have the Alexa. They have all these other things because they allow for that experiment. They allow for that innovation, and they allow themselves to fail, right? So this old school mentality of let's just make incremental, small improvements based on a forecast that may or may not be the right number, right? And everyone just has to do their job and only be good at one thing, and not allowing for that creativity, not allowing for that innovation to come from the bottom up. There was only innovation from the top down, not from the people on the front line speaking to the clients, working on the products themselves, the users of the product themselves, right? So this, and I made a post about it, just kind of asking for opinions on it, but it's how important today, how much more important today, or how powerful today is when you're hiring somebody to look for that entrepreneurial or intrapreneurial mindset, because everybody on your team in some way or the other should be in some way, an innovator. They should always be looking to improve. How can we, build something that complements our current service or product or something like that, but allowing for that, to your point, allowing for that creativity while still fulfilling clearly on the current mission, but also being really aware that the world's moving really fast. And if we don't innovate in some way or the other, we're probably going to get passed by some startup person who thought of this, a year ago. Right. So what are your thoughts on that kind of that intrapreneurial mindset being more and more important as people, are being hired into these companies?
First off, I started my career in recruiting, so this idea of hiring is near and dear to my heart. So I think it's such an interesting thing, because there's two dimensions to this. There's two dimensions. One is the hiring aspect, but you have to understand what is it that you are looking for. And you're talking about entrepreneurial thinking, but let's take something like engineering. We're needing to build a new project. We need to have engineers who help design and come up with it. Engineering is a very, often inside the box kind of thinking. Everything needs to work. The logic has to work. The machines have to work. The lights have to turn on. There's a very linear kind of thinking that goes into a lot of engineering. And, you need that kind of, that's a skill set you need to develop a product. And at the same time, you do need to have that, the mindset to find people who also are logical thinkers, but also are willing to take chances, are willing to take risks, are willing to say, yes, there's a rule about this, but what if we did this other thing to, go outside the rule book, to go outside the challenge? So understanding what you're looking for, because teams aren't a matter of saying, okay, we just need to hire more entrepreneurial types of people. No, it's a matter of bringing on the right skill set. You're going to need the more logical people, because you're going to need a hard edge to say, this is physically not possible to do. But you also need to have the more creative people to say, all right, let's push the envelope, and then create a space where these people can work together. So it's understanding what are the key skills that you need. It's not all one, it's not a monolithic thing, but what are the key skills that you need? The other piece is recognizing as a leader that you just can't keep hiring yourself, which is a challenge many people fall into, is that they are familiar with themselves and what they think they want, so they hire the same person. You need, as a leader, to be conscious of hiring different than yourself, maybe even contrary, opposite to what you're good at, as a way of creating that kind of team that has different ideas being presented. It's an art when it comes to this. So that's part one. Part two is what the leader can bring to the table. Is once you have the team, or maybe you inherit a team, which is a whole other thing, but is setting the expectation and explaining how and why ideas work. So it's more than just simply, saying, all right, we just need to come up with new ideas. What's also showing them and saying, all right, here's how we're going to do it, and here's what failure is going to look like. Because everyone, your first 5 ideas that we try here are going to burn down, and we're not going to make them, they're not going to work, but we need to work through that. And letting them know that experimentation is okay. Failure is okay. In fact, when we fail, we need to learn from the failure. So the leader is able to create the expectation of what the journey is going to look like. That it's not a matter of we can hit the product out of the park on one shot. It's a matter of saying, all right, this is going to take a bit of time, and here's how we're going to experiment. And when you get into a roadblock, here's how we're going to navigate around it. And I'm here with you to figure this out. And we're going to come up with newer ideas and better ideas as we go. But we can't see that right now because the journey has only just started. So it's a mix of these two, understanding the kind of collection of skills that you need. And some of it may be this out of the box entrepreneurial thinking, but some of it's also going to be the linear mindset. You may need both. And then setting the expectations and supporting the team.
There's a quote that aligns with that. I don't know where I saw it or who the quote was from. I might have saw it on a bumper sticker. I'm not sure, but it's
could be a good place for it.
It's a good place for it. It's that you can't put a puzzle together if all the pieces are the same, right? Like it's a puzzle. It's the collection of ideas, skills, concepts, processes, systems, products, technologies, softwares that fulfill upon this mission and vision and make a happy customer or happy client type of thing. It's not, you can't do it if everybody's thinking the same. Right? And I think that's one of those, I don't want to maybe put a label on it and say that it's an old school way of thinking, but it has been a way of thinking for leaders, right? I'm just going to hire a lot of people that I get along with or that I like, or that I can have a conversation with. I'm not going to hire anybody that's going to challenge me because I'm the boss and I shouldn't be challenged, right? And that's where,
to be clear, there is an art here. You obviously don't want to bring on people who are actively going to be working against the team. But the important thing is to recognize it is a blind spot that many managers will just default to hiring people they're familiar with or what they're comfortable with, when their actual goal, in order to have that bigger impact, to have that influence, they actually need to bring on a range of skills and recognizing what are those skills. So that's just a blind spot that a manager needs to be mindful of.
Big time. Well, and that's why it's so important to be, when you're hiring and you're developing people up or picking people to come onto your team, or picking what people that want you to lead them, is the equal parts the skills that we need, the perspectives that we need, but then also the culture values. Like that's why that's so important. That gets overstated a lot, I think, and it can kind of almost seem a little bit too surface level. But in that instance, when you do have a team, and when you look at some of the best sports teams on the planet, like Tom Brady, what if everybody on the team was just like Tom Brady? They'd be arguing the whole freaking time. Right, it wouldn't be good. Or in a hockey player, what if everybody was a goalie? Right, that was a very obvious example, but you know what I mean. But they all come together with different skills, um, different body types, different, emotional makeups, right? But they all are going in the same direction, which is the goal, to win the championship, to do this,
Mhm.
do this thing. And like, I'm Canadian too, so I'll use hockey as an example. Is back in the day, this was a role, which was like some people were the enforcer, and you didn't
Mhm.
play a whole lot. You didn't care to score goals. You just cared to protect your stars and to go after their skilled players, basically, right?
Mhm.
And that was your goal, and you played that role, right, to win for the betterment of the team, right? So if as a coach or a general manager for a team, if you just try to hire a whole bunch of people that you know or Sidney Crosby's, or I don't know if anybody here who's listening knows who Cindy Crosby is, which is weird that people don't. So there's some people that don't know who that is, which blew my mind. But you need people that are willing to fill a role, think of things differently, look at things in a different perspective, but are aligned to the same goals, that have or bought into the same culture, understand the same culture. And that's another thing Tom Brady said. I was at an event and he was speaking at it. He said, we didn't win on skills, we won on culture. Like, everybody on their team was
Mm.
so different, but we all, the culture was so cohesive, and we're all pushing each other in the same direction. We didn't always agree. We saw things differently, but we challenged each other. But we knew when we challenged each other, it was because we wanted to achieve the thing together.
Mhm.
So it's
And
it,
that's the important of having that vision that
Mhm,
everyone can align themselves with,
mhm,
and they can build a shared understanding that they all want that thing, and that
mhm,
the captain, the manager is able to create that space where you can have that lateral trust amongst and communication and interaction among the team members, so they can all work together regardless of what their skill is, what their role is, what they need to do. But if they're all dialed in,
mhm.
and if a manager is able to say, like, all right, we've got different skills here, but I know how to, like a conductor, play
Yeah.
the orchestra in just the right way, so the right music is being created. Um, that's where, I'm now mixing my metaphors here, but that's
Yeah.
where we want to, the leader can step in and create that vision so that that
Mhm,
team can come forward together, and
mhm.
that culture, whatever it is, and it's going to be different with different people. The culture is an evolutionary thing, but that is what keeps people together and on mission.
When it's not as obvious, because obviously I was using the sports analogy. It's obvious. It's, we want to win the championship,
Yeah.
right? At least for some people. There obviously there's some who just want to pad their stats and make a bunch of money and that kind of thing. But that's what Tom Brady was alluding to. If somebody had that mindset, he shook their hand and was like, "I can't wait to play against you." It was a really powerful. It was much more powerful when he said it, but it was a very powerful quote that he said. But that leads me to a
But
quote.
this is a really important point that you just brought up,
Right.
because the idea of winning a game has a very finite end.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of work that is done in the world that doesn't have a finite end. Like, for example, healthcare, for instance. Like, when
Mhm.
do you win at healthcare?
Oh,
You
yeah.
don't. It's an ongoing thing. And so, as a leader in something like healthcare, and I'm just picking that as an example, you could pick any other industry that is similar, but just this idea of the mission is caring for people and reducing suffering and those sorts of ideas, and that you'll never win that, but that's
Mhm.
what you're striving for, and that getting everyone into believing that's the mission, even though there's no finish line you will ever cross to be like, okay, we've won healthcare,
Mhm.
we can all go home. It's important to recognize that there are aspects of work that are finite, that do
Mhm.
have a definite end. If you're working on a project or you're delivering a widget, that might
Mhm.
have a finite end. But there are other aspects of work, other organizations that are on a very different kind of mission that is it's ongoing.
Yeah. Those
And how
finite
do we
games.
keep people engaged on that mission where there's no end date?
Mhm. And those finite games are just a byproduct of, or they are a byproduct of achieving the bigger mission, of
Mhm.
achieving the bigger impact, right? And I think that's one thing that, a lot of leaders and even business, like a lot of business owners, we're just talking about, managers and then directors and VP level, but business owners too, when you're setting up, when you're bringing your team in, and even when you're building your own business and you're
Mhm.
deciding, okay, what are we going to do? what's going to drive our economic engine, what impact are we going to make, what mission are we on, what vision do we have. It's really important to make that really clear, and not focus so much on the goal, like a revenue goal or a number of clients goal. If you focus on the mission, on the vision that you want to achieve, I want to help this many people over the next 10 years, or I want to make a change in this, if you're a nonprofit, right, you want to help this many get off the streets, or whatever it is. But if you get too caught up in like, I just need to get this much, I just need to get this grant, or I need to get this much revenue right now, or I need to make this many widgets, or that kind of thing, then all the decisions that you make are just to achieve that thing. You're playing a finite game. When, I mean, Simon Sinek had, obviously his book, The Infinite Game. Yeah. You're playing an infinite game. Obviously, life itself, we're not going to live forever, right? But you're playing an ongoing game that does not have an end date in the next quarter, which is where a lot of companies base success and failure off of, which is quarterly or yearly, right? When you just
I think that's where organizations get confused between what your vision is and your metrics and your goals, and that they focus on those measurable tactical things, which are still important. It's still important to understand what are those tactical things that you need to achieve, but not confusing it with the vision. What are we ultimately trying to do here? What are what would be ultimate success? This quarter we may be aiming for a certain revenue goal. Great. There's going to be tactical things you could do to meet that, and it's in service, not the end. It's in service of this larger vision.
Yeah, they use those again, the quarterly reviews and the quarterly goals or yearly goals or whatever it is, as like that. That's it. And then what's beyond that, we'll deal with it then. That's what it turns into. And I think, especially like you get to like SMEs when they feel like they're always in survival mode. And I think partly because of that is because they focus on the goal as whatever that next thing is, and then they don't see beyond that. Right. Like we just got to hit this revenue right now. So I'm going to make some short-sighted decisions, and I'm going to lead in a short-sighted way in order to hit this one goal. And then we hit it and we're like, oh crap, there's another goal we have to hit now. And we're not set up to hit it properly, or everyone's burnt out, or everyone cheated on their metrics, right? And shoved a bunch of stuff in the pipeline right there to make it look like it feeds into like a toxic mindset of vanity, first of all, but then just short-sighted, I'll deal with it later type of mindset, which then turns into short-sighted goals, which turns into short-sighted decisions, which turns into your business isn't going to be around as long as you want it to be. I love it. I don't love it. Actually, that's a terrible thing.
Well, you love the understanding. That particular result is not what we're talking about, but it's the understanding of this is the impact that that kind of short-term thinking, that kind of prioritizing things, that kind of leadership can have on individuals, but also on the culture of an organization. And organizations that are suffering are usually suffering because someone in the leadership chain has said, I am going to value this metric above the welfare of my people.
A lot of times they don't pick the right, many times they're not focused on the right metric. Right. There's a concept that Jim Collins has. It's the hedgehog concept. And one of its 3 intersecting circles, one of the circles is being really, really clear on what drives your economic engine. So what is that 1 or 2 mother of all metrics that if we focused on improving, whatever improvement might mean for that metric, would kind of determine the success of the organization, right, towards the mission, right? So there was an example. I think it was Walgreens or CVS. I can't remember, but they were judging their economic engine, what drives their economic engine, their success, based on how many stores in certain locations they could put up, right? So it was just shoving stores in. Just how many stores do we have in Vegas? We have 20. Cool. That means we should be making this much money from the Vegas region or area, whatever it is. But then they noticed that there was, 50% of their stores were generating 90% of their revenue, and those other 50% of the stores were not being taken care of. They were in bad areas. There was, no, like, they weren't able to keep things off the shelves. They weren't employing the right type of people. So that wasn't very efficient. So they kind of pulled it back, and they now, I think, I can't remember how long this was ago. They probably shifted since then. But at this time, they shifted their economic engine, what they judge their success off of, to profit per store. So they actually narrowed it down to per store. So now they have to focus on, now the decisions they're going to make, what they're judging the success off of is, are we putting stores in the right areas? Are we hiring the right people? Do we have good products still on the shelves? Are we keeping the stores clean? This, that, and all these types of things, right? So it forces them to focus on the right things to create success. So now instead of, out of the 20 stores, 10 of the stores bring in 90% of the revenue, they might have, 15 stores that are much more equal in bringing in revenue, which then will equal more prosperity, more success, more revenue, that kind of thing. So it's asking yourself as a business owner, even as a leader, if you're an entrepreneur in a company, what are you basing the success of your team, your organization off of? And is that focus creating short-sighted decisions that aren't allowing for long-term success? Or are you just basing it off of, vanity metrics? Like, oh, we sold this much gross revenue, but then everybody's returning all the stuff because it's a crap product, right? But you're only looking at the gross revenue from the month, sort of thing. So it's asking that question and being honest about that. I love me some Jim Collins.
Good to Great, right? That was his book, Good to Great.
Well, he had a few: Good to Great, Great by Choice, and Built to Last. And then there's another one, something about it was about companies. Instead of studying great companies, he studied companies that appeared great but then fell off, and I can't remember what that one's called.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's a really, all of his stuff's really good. They're tough reads because they're very research. Like his team did research, and then it was all based off of research with a lot of figures and that kind of stuff. So if you're new to reading these types of books, they can be kind of tough, but they're worth it if you put in the time. For sure. And someone asked me what my favorite book from him was, and that's one author I don't think I could pick one. Great by Choice was probably the most digestible, and it had some really good quippy, like fire bullets than cannonballs. Like that concept is I like it's more quippy. It's just easier stuff to remember, but they're super valuable.
Build, though, like I agree. Great by Choice is probably my favorite out of his books, but it kind of builds off of Good to Great.
Yeah. It kind of brings in a lot of those like what's the SMAC concept, that acronym.
I'm not going to remember the acronym.
This is something I can't remember what it stood for. I have to go back and look, but it's kind of like what we're talking about, is allowing for experimentation and setting like proper goals for your organization. I can't freaking remember, but I wanted to end this off of, actually we just got talking, man, and I wanted to do this fun exercise. We'll have to do it another time, but one thing I did want to hit on, so you're turning, or you have turned 50?
I'll be turning 50 a little bit later this year.
You have, for your 50th birthday, you are going to do something kind of crazy. And I can't remember exactly. I wrote it down. You're going to be walking the Camino de Santiago is that in Italy or in Spain?
It's in Spain. It's a pilgrimage in Spain. It starts there's a number of different Caminos, but technically it starts in a small town in France, but it's mostly in northern Spain. Covers 800 kilometers, and it's been in place for people have been walking the Camino for over 1,000 years. I think it's like 1,100 or 1,200 years or something like that people have been walking this Camino. And I like to try to do something interesting or novel when I reach a milestone in my age, and 50 seemed like a year to do this. So that's going to be the thing I want to do when I turn 50. Is
you're going to walk 800 kilometers in France and Spain.
Yep. It will take a little over a month to do. Different people will do it in different times, but most people do it in about a month. So that's everyday walking.
Are there rules to this? Like you can't get on a bike, like you're not allowed to use a bike, or you can't use a car. Like so you're going to walk, obviously. So is it just you're going to walk from one town to the other? You're going to bring a backpack? Like, what is that?
Yeah, they have like a little booklet that you need to get. If you're actually doing the proper Camino, you have a little booklet. And then as you come into a new town, they will stamp you. You'll get your book stamped. Cool. And so when it comes to rules, when you get to the end and you arrive in Santiago, you can submit your book, and they will check to make sure that you had, so, a certain number of stamps, and there's certain requirements that you need to meet for that. But as long as you meet, a certain number of stamps along the way, then it doesn't matter whether you walked, or if you took your bicycle, or if you, used a wheelchair,
Okay.
like, as long as you're hit it, like you are showing that you've actually traversed the distance. That's the main requirement. But how you do it it's your own Camino, as they say.
I get so that's cool. Your own Camino. I like that. It's I love it when I hear of people doing those types of challenges, because especially if you have, I'm not going to say we all have cushy lives, but I mean, comparatively to, a few hundred years ago, we have very cushy lives. But putting ourselves in those types of situations where it's a challenge, it's not something that you will get the gratification. Like, the gratification isn't going to come. I mean, you're going to have great experiences and that kind of stuff, but you're going to be miserable at times too. You're going to be pushing yourself, in ways you probably haven't done before, and putting yourselves in those situations when you innately don't have to. Like, you could stay home and order DoorDash, and you could be, order stuff off Amazon, or watching stuff on Amazon, having popcorn and pizza and that kind of stuff. But you chose to, I'm going to go walk 800 kilometers in a month when I turn 50 to challenge myself. Or I'm going to say a lot of people probably when they turn 50 are doing something a little bit different. Probably includes Vegas and that kind of stuff.
Well, like, to me, I see this as you say, it's a personal challenge. It's a bit of an adventure, but it's also a long chunk of time. It's not a matter of like, I'm just going away for a vacation for a week. Like, this is a month commitment. But that's just me. Like, there are many people who choose to do the Camino where it's a spiritual journey. It's a religious journey. It's originally conceived as a religious pilgrimage. There are people come to the Camino as a way of facing the fear, the things that they're afraid of in their life, as a way of processing. Maybe it's overcoming trauma, maybe it's overcoming some other aspect of their life, or they need to just deal with grief. Whatever it happens to be, people come to the Camino for different reasons. For me, it's a challenge. I am challenging myself at this point in my life, and I'm open to that.
That's what I love about it. Is that it's even the people that are facing something, they're facing the fear. They're facing their fear. They're not avoiding it. They're facing something. They're trying to overcome something. And whether it's a challenge, just a challenge to somebody, or, they're overcoming something. I think all of us need to, I'm not saying all of us need to go walk 800 kilometers, go fly to France. And
it's not for everybody.
Yeah, no. But, you could start like another challenge. Like, for us, like, our challenge is like when we sold everything, moved into a trailer, and we traveled the country, ran a business for 4 months. Like, that was a challenge. We didn't have to do that, but we wanted to push ourselves. We wanted to test ourselves. We wanted to prove to ourselves that we could do it, and kind of set a little bit of an example that you can run a business and live the life that you want. But you don't have to do that either. That's a pretty big one as well. But you can start, actually go for a walk every morning. You can start reading a book, challenge yourself to read 2 books a month for a year. You could start eating better. You could join what's the thing, a Toastmasters. You could join a Toastmasters if you're scared of public speaking and that's a fear of yours. Join a Toastmaster. I think at least your first few sessions are free, right? But putting yourselves in these positions to grow is invaluable. I think it's such a strong lesson, and it's something that I don't think that we do very often, especially when it's, okay, I want to move up in my company. I want to keep, I want to go from manager to director, or contributor to manager, whatever it is. I want to move myself up. And you just think, okay, if I just keep doing the same things, but better, I'll get there. And that's not always the case. Sometimes you need to challenge yourselves in different ways. You need to challenge your perspectives, challenge yourself to think in a different way. And that's one of the things, like, in our society today, we have so many biases that we allow ourselves to get in the way of opening up our minds to having conversations with people we otherwise wouldn't have had conversations with, to ideas that are outside of what we're currently locked into. But there's those putting yourselves in those positions to be challenged and being open to the lessons from the challenge and experience. It is so important. So I respect those that do those things so much, because I think it's like we all just need to do so much more of that. And again, it doesn't have to be walk 800 kilometers or these kind of things. It could be, show up to a Toastmasters meeting. It could be go for a walk it could be something like that. Right?
And this brings us back almost full circle right to your first question, because challenging yourself comes from a place of agency where you actually recognize that not only that there is something out there that you could do, but that you can actually do it, that you can take those challenges, you can push yourself. It is okay for you to take a class, go to Toastmasters, work on a skill, read a book that helps you learn about, it's okay, that you can do this. And then you can take the step to be like, okay, what if I actually do this? What if I, make this a real thing? That's where having that agency, that sense of not only can I do it, but I'm going to do it, is a good step towards, you taking greater control of your life, but also allowing you to move into leadership roles. Yeah. Whether that's formal leadership or informal leadership, that sense of agency is extremely important.
Yeah. And if you do more of those things, you build, I call it the portfolio of proof. So when a challenge comes up that you don't have control over, you have a portfolio of proof that you can overcome it and you can do it. If an opportunity comes up, you're like, I don't know if I can do it. You can pull from your portfolio that, I've overcome challenges similar to this. Maybe it might not be the exact same thing, right? But I have done it before. Like anybody who's ridden a bike before used to not be able to ride a bike, and they figured it out. They learned how to do it. So that's a simple example, but that's part of the portfolio of proof that, I can figure something out and I can get good at something that I'm currently not good at. Right. So the more of those experiences, the more you can build that portfolio, the more opportunity opens up for yourself and the more opportunity that you can see. Because we close off so much from our preview that, okay, this isn't something I've done before, so I'm not going to look at even trying to do it. Or this, I don't have these skills, or I've never figured something like that out before, right? So you're closed off with all these opportunities. You're not even looking at them. You don't even recognize them because your mind just sees them as impossible. Whereas if you have this portfolio, all of a sudden your mind sees those as possible, probable even, and now you can see them better. Beautiful. Well, Matt, this has been this is really good conversation. I really, really appreciate you. Really quickly, give everybody a little bit of where can they find you, and what can they look forward to when they come see you, when they come ask you questions and interact with you at the Young Professionals Leadership Summit?
Okay, so first to answer, best way to find me is just find me on LinkedIn, Matthew Devine, do a search for me. I'm an executive coach, so that's the best place to find me. And as far as when it comes to the leadership forum, the thing I want to talk about is the thing that we've been speaking about. What is the impact? What is the impact that not only do individuals have, but what can they create? And I think especially as important at the conference is recognizing that everyone who's attending as a participant, everyone's sharing, you are all sharing in this same vision of, like, you see something in yourself or you imagine something that you could be better and you want to be inspired. Look sideways to the person sitting at the table beside you or at the chair beside you. These are your colleagues. These are people that you can connect with, and they may be the ones that you can build a company with, that you can network with, that you can, brainstorm problems when you are into leadership roles. So my advice or my thought is, like, recognize that when you're at this conference, that you have the ability to connect with the people alongside you, and that those relationships might be your gateway to the future. It's not just the people on stage, it's the people in the audience as well.
And that's the biggest thing in a lot of these conferences. I've been to a lot of great conferences, and the ones that I got the most out of wasn't because of what I learned from the people on stage. It was what I got it's who I met from the people in the stands with me, right? And I'm not saying that you're not going to get a ton out of those on stage at the conference. You're going to get a lot out of that, but also don't set your intentions beforehand, what you want to get out of it. And then so your actions are aligned with it. And sometimes those actions are networking, meeting some people, shaking some hands that otherwise you wouldn't have maybe naturally gravitated towards. So that's absolutely amazing advice, Matt. But we'll wrap it up here. You can check Matt out. I'll put all of his links below. He has some great content on LinkedIn, and he's also been on our good friend Rob Cameronpour's podcast. So check him out there as well. But thank you again, everybody. So check us out at the Young Professionals Leadership Summit coming October 19th. I'll put the link in the description below so you can get your tickets and see what other speakers we have there, what you can kind of look forward to. And we're so excited for this event. It's turning out to be a really, really great event, a very impactful event. And I'm just very excited to see it all unfold. But thank you, everybody, for listening. And until next time, keep chasing your next summit.